Charles Wallace Fellow at the Center of South Asian Studies, SOAS, University of London in 2007. Besides, he has also served as a visitor to Foundation, Mason Designs, Paris in 2008, and plus many other, centers or research institutes in India where he served as, a visiting professor. And besides that, he has been the General President of UP History Congress in 2018 Lucknow session. Also, he was elected as the Sectional President of Medieval Indian History section of 2014 session of Indian History Congress at AMU. And besides that, he has been the member of various committees such as academic bodies, history associations, is member of Indian History Congress, Executive Committee member of UP History Congress. And of course, he is, what is very important is that he is also associated with that 6th volume of a comprehensive history series. The general editor of that was, Professor Satish Chandra, and he is one of the editors of that series. And I believe that he is also, he has already contributed some chapters also to that. So with these, I know this introduction is incomplete. Our students and fellow participants, in fact, not students, our fellow participants are very eager to listen to you. It's a very unique topic, I would say, for all of us, because we are not very familiar with medieval archaeology per se, because we have, as I already mentioned, heard a lot about ancient archaeology, the archaeology of earlier times. So I hope Sir will take us to what is meant by this medieval archaeology, and what does it tell about, and then how it is done and all. And with this, I invite Professor Syed Nadeem Rezavi sir to this refresher course. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Khaled, for a very exaggerated introduction. Dear friends, just like all of you, I am also a student of history and have devoted my time and energy in sitting in various archives and libraries, consulting books, primary sources, written material. As all of you know that history is a study of the past which is based on written records. So that is what I had been doing all along. But on the way, during the period when I was doing my PhD and was interested to collect material to write my chapter on the architects, my attention was drawn towards the ruins of Fatehpur Sikri, and from architects I shifted to their work. When I started visiting Fatehpur Sikri, actually I did so during the period when I was a research scholar in the Department of History, doing my research, as Khalid said said just now, under Professor Irfan Habib, who in those days was the chairman and coordinator of the center. And whenever any guest of some importance would come, or there was a workshop or seminar, he would direct me to take the guest or the participants to Akbar's capital, Fatehpur Sikri. On that tour, I would act as a guide. And as you know, that probably you too would have visited a number of places. A guide is supposed to answer questions. So a lot of questions would be put up to me. What is this? What is that? What is the meaning of this? If Fatehpur Sikri was a town, you are only showing us the palace complex. Where is the rest of the town? Where was the food prepared and where was such and such thing located? Please ask everyone to
Please mute yourself. Vishwas Korwar, please mute yourself.
Sometime. Ikram, it is better you remove him.
I did the same. Yes. Please go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Are the mics off now?
Yes. I muted him.
Please request them not to on them again. So, innocent questions would be put up to me. Those questions would be very difficult for me to answer. I would answer some hazardous guess. But those, trips made me think. And made me realize that only sitting in the libraries and consulting the books is not enough. Ultimately, I discovered the works which were being carried out at that moment in Baroda, in Gujarat, where the first foundation bricks of what now is known as medieval archaeology was being laid out by Mehta and his team, M.J. Mehta. And then one of my senior teachers, Professor Iftidar Alam Khan, who used to teach us the Mughals, he would teach us the reign of Akbar, Humayun, and early Mughals. In the fag end of his career, he had started carrying on surveys, and by 70s, he had started in right earnest in contributing to the field of medieval archaeology. So the works of both the Baroda historians as well as those at Aligarh, I named one of them, Iqtidar Alam Khan. Another person who actually was a professor of ancient Indian history, Professor R.C. Gaur. He is famous for he was an archaeologist. He is famous for his excavations of Atranji Kheda, one of the first sites where iron is found. Very important site, very near to Aligarh. During late 70s, early 80s, on the recommendations of Professor Nurul Hassan, he had, started excavations on a national project at Fatehpur Sikri, along with Archaeological Survey of India. In fact, from 1975 onwards, the national project. In fact, Nurul Hassan, as education minister, had initiated two national projects, one at Hampi, another at Fatehpur Sikri. And Professor R.C. Gaur, who had been our teacher of ancient India, became one of the directors of the excavations at Fatehpur Sikri. So very gradually and slowly, although I was doing research on urban middle classes under the Mughals, the professionals under the Mughals, I started getting drawn towards the material remains. And when I was drawn towards the material remains, I realized that the person who is supposed to have been the first Director General of Archaeology, Alexander Cunningham, Sir Alexander Cunningham, almost all of you would have heard his name. There is hardly any library which does not have Cunningham reports, very important reports of the surveys and explorations which General Cunningham had undertaken during the 19th century. And he was supposed to be the founder of Indian archaeology. But soon I realized that he was not only the founder of Indian archaeology, but he was also the founder of what is known as historical archaeology. I'll come to these terms. I'm just giving you the basics of the subject, and then I will start showing you. And I remember, although I have a number of slides to show, but this lecture would remain very basic. I won't go into many details. So General Cunningham, in fact, did not indulge in simple archaeology. He never excavated a site. In fact, excavations had yet to develop during that period. It was with Sir Mortimer Wheeler that proper excavations had started. There were others also. I'm not going into the details of that, but I'm just taking the most prominent names of the field. General Cunningham, who became the first Governor General of Archaeological Survey of India, made it a practice that whenever he would go to a site, he would first read the sources related with that site. Now, for example, when he started, one of the first projects which he took up was to trace the route of Chinese travelers like Yuan Chuang and Fa Hian. And during the time that General Cunningham was working, the travelogues of Fa Hian and Yuan Chuang were being translated into English and were now available to the scholars to read. So Cunningham would first consult that, look up the information what Yuan Chuang or Fa Hian had written, what is the name of the place which he had visited, how he went from which place to which, and then he would explore the areas, pinpoint the locations as mentioned by Cunningham. So what was he doing? He was taking the help of written source to interpret and understand the material remains. So in fact, he was laying down the foundation of what is known as historical archaeology. Not only that, but along with him, there was another person during the same period of time, perhaps a little earlier. The founder of Aligarh Muslim University. The person who was an employee of the company Bahadur at the time when the revolt of 1857. The person who wrote the Asbab-e-Baghawat-e-Hind. At Delhi, he was actively involved in an archaeology society which had been established. And he had been carrying out his explorations even before General Cunningham started with his own surveys. During the 19th century itself, he came up with a very famous work, Asarus Sanadid, the remnants of the past at Delhi. And if you look at this book, it has now been translated into English. He would also make sketches, explore the structures, but along with that, he would also consult the literary works concerned with these particular buildings. Not only that, he would also use epigraphs. Even those epigraphs which he could not himself read. For example, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan knew Persian and Urdu, but he never knew the old Indian scripts of the past. And we are informed that during the course of his surveys, when he was exploring the Qutub complex and other places, he found an epigraph which he could not decipher. But what he did was that he climbed to the level where those inscriptions were given on top of a slab of wood pulled up by police. And while he was, hanging from there, he traced the words as they were written on the monument and left them for us, left that inscription for posterity. He could not read, but he copied it out for others who could read. So what was he doing? He was once again trying to jumble up together the written records with what is known as the archaeological evidence. Archaeology basically is the study of material culture and its relationship to human behavior. Archaeology basically dealt with a period when writing was not known. The things which had been made or unmade in the past were actually physical manifestations of the man's activities. And they were of two types, both embedded within the ground. As a student of history, you go to a library or an archive to read. For an archaeologist, his archives is within the soil. So we can call it soil archives. And these material remains embedded within the soil, which give us information about the past human endeavors. They are of two types. They are either bones or artifacts. That is, material which has been intentionally formed through human activity. They may be made, they may be unmade. These artifacts as most of you would be knowing, are again labeled as relics, which can be lifted from the place and studied at leisure at your desk, or they are so huge and massive that they are monumental, they are known as monuments, and they are to be studied in situ. All these things which give us information about the human activity of the past, all these artifacts, they are all unconscious evidence which man has left behind, unlike the writings. Right? Now, all these objects which you can see on your window at the moment, they are, this doorway or the pottery shards, the weapons. They are something which were made for their use. They were not made so that I and you would look up at them and try to interpret the past. Right? And this traditional archaeology was a science where the relationship between the relics, these things which had been made and made by human endeavor, which could be lifted, and the monuments, was the main archaeological data through which the study of past was being made. But as I just said, that whether it was Cunningham or Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, all of them started a branch which came to be known as historical archaeology, in which the past was tried to be understood by taking into account both the material remains as well as the texts which had been written in the past. So, archaeology was just the study of the material remains. Historical archaeology became a field where the additional help of written records was taken. Before I come to what is medieval archaeology and how we follow that, again something which almost every one of us knows, but just a reminder that defined in such a way, the first historical figure in India was the figure of Gautama Buddha, because about Buddha, his existence, his life, it has been mentioned in the contemporary Greek sources, जिसके बारे में लिखित हुए भी मिल जाता है. He becomes the first historic character because you don't have only the material remains of belonging to that period, but also written word regarding that he existed. Similarly, in India, the historic period starts with the Mauryan period, because it was from the Mauryan period that now a script had been developed and the Ashokan edicts placed on his pillars as well as blocks of stone, block edicts, they start giving us information about that period. Before Mauryan period, everything was oral. Now, medieval archaeology, the subject which I have taken up today, is actually not a distinct, separate subject at all. It is a part of historical archaeology. The only difference is that by the time that we reach the medieval period, many more sources, variety of documents, epigraphs, as well as monumental remains makes the job a little complex. The Mauryan period, we have only a few sources, for example. But as we come near in time, naturally there are more survivals, not only the survivals of the material structures, but also survivals of the writings. So medieval archaeology is actually historical archaeology, but a historical archaeology dealing with the medieval period, a period for which we have lot of documents, lot of written sources, lot of archival material, and lot of material remains. And because there is so much surfeit of information, that now many kinds of postulates and models can be made and archaeologically and historically tested. As I mentioned, that the historic period starts when Indians come to know about a script known as Brahmi script. Brahmi script started developing even before the Mauryan period, but it is a crude form. But by the period of Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, a near perfection. So much so that the Mauryan Brahmi now becomes a well-established, distinct, model for everything. And it is with the help of these Ashokan edicts that now we are sure about the extent of the Mauryan Empire. For example, something which we could not have been sure prior to that. Let us also remember another thing, that everything, every aspect of the past, every aspect of human endeavor cannot be written down as a source. हर चीज लिखित में नहीं हो सकती. There are a number of aspects which can never be expressed in writing. They can only be understood through the material remains. So historical archaeology or medieval archaeology, in fact, becomes a study where either the archaeological material is elaborated upon by written material, or the lacuna and gaps in the written material are tried to be filled up by the material remains of the past. For example, we do not have any written evidence about the technology of the past. What type of horse bit was there? What type of, stirrup was there? All these things can only be understood by the sculptural remains of the past. For example, here, look at the horse. Look at the stirrup. Stirrup is that piece in which you rest your feet while sitting on the horse. In the early phases, we find that it is either depicted as of rope or of leather, not of iron. It is only later on that iron stirrups start making their appearance or metallic stirrups start making their appearance in the sculptures from the past. So certain things which have not been written, certain aspects of technology can only be explained by using the material remains of the past. Now, for example, coming to the medieval period. If you read Abul Fazl's Akbarnama, he mentions that Humayun, when he attacked Gujarat, he attacked the kingdom of Bahadur Shah of Gujarat. Abul Fazl says that Humayun, in fact, not only conquered Champaner, but the city had been burned by Humayun. It was totally devastated. Now, when M.J. Mehta started his excavations at Champaner, he found no evidence of any type of burning at any place in the remains of Champaner. So, in fact, whatever had been claimed by Abul Fazl for Humayun was negated by the actual archaeological evidence put up before us by Mehta. I don't have time at the moment to explain why Abul Fazl did it, but the facts remain that a wrong conception, a wrong notion presented to us by the historical records was corrected by the actual archaeological remains. Remember one thing, that writing is always biased. It is either biased in favor of someone or biased against someone. The writing is inspired. You have to prove something. You have to disprove something. But as far as the material remain is concerned, there is hardly any bias. Whatever was made depicts the technology of the time, the historical truth of the time. And that is why the help of archaeological material to understand, say, a period like medieval period in India is absolutely necessary for us. I'll give you a very popular example. Throughout the colonial period, even till date, there was this legend of the Black Taj opposite the mausoleum of Mumtaz Mahal at Agra. Poems were written, even some of the very, important historians started believing these theories. The excavations which were carried out in 1990s brought to light the Mahtab Bagh, and ultimately the rumor of a Black Taj were ruled out. No source was able to rule out the existence of a Black Taj. It was only the material remains which were excavated at the site that we were able to debunk such a thing. So one of the aspects of medieval archaeology is to take the help of the written records to correct the notion which has been presented before us by the written sources, number one. Number two, fill up the historical gaps. Number three, add to the knowledge of things which have not been mentioned in the written sources. Yet another very important job of historical archaeology, and along with that medieval archaeology, is the job of preservation and restoration. Whatever has come out from the past, and these are the two aspects, preservation and restoration, which have been emphasized again and again in the writings of General Cunningham, by Ferguson, and ultimately by a person known as Sir John Marshall. And we find that from day one, soon after the establishment of the Archaeological Survey of India, time and again, rules and regulations were passed by the government of the day, how to take care, how to conserve and preserve the remains of the past, so that one may be able to understand much more by the help of a study of those monuments. It was from the 1870s that rules started being made. For example, in 1873, there was Circular number 9 of Public Works, which was one of the regulations which talked about the duty of preserving the buildings and monuments of historical and archaeological importance, and which were not to be destroyed. In 1875, Sir John Strachey, who was the Lieutenant Governor of what was United Provinces of that time, it was he who proposed the creation of a department known as Archaeological Public Works at Agra. Certain grants were given to it, and those grants were utilized in conserving the monuments of the Agra region. Sir John Strachey was very clear what he wanted. He said that the duty is simply one of preservation against further injury. It is not to restore. We don't have to rebuild the building. The work of conservation, which is to be taken up, does not mean that you think that it must have been beautiful, so you add things to that and try to end up with a beautiful monument. No. Your only job as a conservator is to preserve it from further injury. Ultimately, Sir John Marshall, around 1903 and 1907, he came up with his manual, which is now treated as the Bible for the conservation of Indian monuments. And in that, the same thing was re-emphasized, that historical value is gone when their authenticity is destroyed. You don't renew it. Whatever is broken or decayed, that should just be maintained as it is. If there is something which is half broken, you just see to it in the conservation that it remains half broken. No further damage is actually brought in that particular monument. You are not supposed to rebuild it. Something which has been attempted by the Aga Khan Trust, both at Humayun's tomb and the garden area nearby, where there are number of Mughal monuments, the tomb of Abdul Rahim Khanan, and ultimately in Hyderabad, where the tombs of the local Sultan were. They have actually renewed it in contravention to all the rules which had been laid down by the Archaeological Survey of India from 19th century onwards. Now, for example, one of the greatest jobs, as I said, is not to add. Before you is a monument at Fatehpur Sikri. Now, there was one officer of ASI who suddenly thought that this dilapidated wall was actually a part of the Ibadat Khana of Akbar. You can see in the second slide that he started using bricks and trying to complete it. In fact, during his tenure as the superintendent at Fatehpur Sikri, he rebuilt this mosque. Fortunately, after he left the place, the ASI itself then demolished it and brought it down to the original level where it was. Or take, for example, how in enthusiasm to rebuild and beautify, the originals were tampered with. Look at the slide above. There are two separate buildings with slight tapering between them. One is a little higher than the next one. Look at the height of this one. It is a little higher than this particular structure. And look at the tapering of the side, just like in the Tughlaq architecture. Remember that in the early period of Akbar, a slight tapering is found in all the monuments which were built in the first half of Akbar's reign. But the enthusiastic officer, in order to beautify the place, now has converted two separate distinct structures with tapering walls into a single structure with no taper at all, and added the chhajjas, which in his wisdom he thought should be there if it's a Mughal monument. Another monument at Fatehpur Sikri, the Stonecutters Mosque. It was also renovated. Renovated between inverted commas, actually rebuilt. Look at, and both these photos I have taken from the ASI bulletin, ASIR, the Archaeology Survey of India report. I have not taken the photo. Both these photographs belong to ASI. One before renovation, one after the renovation. Now look at the original picture. The door is trabeate. Entrance is trabeate, both the entrances. Now ASI officer who was in charge, in his wisdom thought that Mughals are known for their arches. True arch was known. So how can they have something which was known in ancient India? अरे arch तो मुसलमान है और arcuate हिंदू है. So when he rebuilt, he replaced the trabeated entrances by an arch. He tampered with the one. This is something which we should avoid. So one of the basic job of a person indulging in medieval archaeology is to remain faithful to the monument and only conserve those portions so that there is no further decay. To rebuild that particular building is in fact a criminal act. The conservators themselves at ASI in fact tampered with the monuments which had been given under their protection. Now let me come to another aspect of medieval archaeology. Does any one of you have any idea? Every one of us knows how were the palaces built, how the nobility was living, how the king's palace was made, how was the Daulat Khana, how was the Diwan-e-Am. But what about the common people? The bureaucracy, the officers of the state, the merchants, वो भी तो कहीं रहते होंगे ना? They were also living. The only source of information for them is either the Hibanamas, sale deeds, I'll come to them, or the actual physical remains of the past. For example, here before you, I am showing two residential structures at Fatehpur Sikri. They were not only excavated by the Aligarh team, but we also made plans of them, and both these plans I have taken from my book. And as you can see here, that what we find is that we can reconstruct the mode of living of people like you and me only and only if we take these physical remains of the past. We all know about hammams, the great baths. But what about the toiletry, the toilets, the washrooms? That's an essential part. How were the toilets made? I mean, it's a separate topic altogether. I'm just introducing it here. I am showing you two photographs. One, the simple, basic step toilet with a pit in the middle. These are the steps with cavities in between. And then there are water channels running through this area, and then a pit so that all the water and refuse would fall and look at the seats. A big toilet with a number of seats. Dry toilet, which you can still find in some of the villages till date. But then, within the same period, the higher members of the society would have this sandas type of toilets. Now you find that there are holes, and within the holes, the refuse would fall into a subterraneous chamber. There would be a different, entrance to that chamber, internal chamber, from where the refuse can be collected and disposed of. So these are the toilets which are quite modern sandas type of toilets, and we find both these varieties at, say, for example, Fatehpur Sikri. Unfortunately, no written record was mentioned, or for that matter, take into account the hydraulics. How was the water lifted? How was it collected and taken to various parts of, say, for example, the palatial complex? Now, in the photograph which are there, you can see the first photograph, the larger one, the Hathi Pole, the main entrance gate of Fatehpur Sikri. It's built on top of a ridge. Now, just in front of the Hathi Pole, the elephant gate, below the ridge, just at the level of the lake of Fatehpur Sikri, you have a step well, and through this step well, artificial wells at various stages, and water would be lifted from this well. The channel would bring it here, from here it would go here, and then ultimately on the top. Look at the various stages through which the water would be lifted, and this is how we come to know that how from the level of the lake, the water would be raised to the top of the hill, where it would be supplied to various corners of the palatial complex. There is no historical record, any written record of this technology or how the hydraulics was actually functioning during that period. The only way we can find anything about this aspect is through the study of the physical remains of that particular period. There are also, certain other type of evidences which help us fill up the gap. Now, it's a very hazy slide. It is, a temple scene made on one of the walls of Fatehpur Sikri. There is a deity sitting in the Garbhagriha. There is only a section of that. And here is a gentleman, a Mughal person with a headgear, his jama, reddish color or brownish color. And if, I don't know whether it's visible to you from far off or not, this yellowish rounded form around his head the halo. Remember that in Gautama Buddha's images, in Jaina images from the ancient period, we have the halo around religious personages, sculptures of religious personages, portraits of religious personages. In European art, once again, the religious as well as imperial authority would have halo. Most of the modern day scholars of miniature painting write that the halo, which had been known in India from the very ancient times, because we have them from ancient period in the Buddhist and Jain art, later on in Hindu art as well, that had possibly disappeared only to reappear from the period of Jahangir. And thus, if you read S.P. Verma, if you read any of the authorities on art, any of their books, they tell us that halo in Mughal paintings makes its appearance once again from the reign of Jahangir. Now, here is a painting from the period of Akbar within his own palace with a golden halo around a person on the wall. In a way, debunking the theory that the halo was not known to the artists of Akbari period. Now, Abakosh, who has written an article on the surface decorations in the Lahore fort, also reproduces in that paper a photograph which comes from a sarai located near the tomb of Humayun, which has now been renovated by Aga Khan Memorial Trust. Now, in this photograph, there are, in fact, if you look at this photograph, you can see my arrow. There is a woman and a man. Woman, figure of a woman and a figure of a man. You can see the face of the man. I don't know whether it's visible to you. And this mark points out that there is this darkened circle around it with, sun rays coming out of it. A radiant sun, the halo in the form of a radiant sun. At a monument which possibly dates to the late period of Akbar or to the early period of Jahangir. I date this particular painting to the date of Akbar, as I showed you here. Now, both these paintings I take to be the latter period of Akbar's reign. Unfortunately, this painting which I am depicting before you, thanks to Abakosh that she took this photograph, and thanks to Ratish Nanda of Aga Khan Memorial Trust, that Ratish Nanda and his team scrapped off the original plaster on which this painting was made. It has been lost to us forever. And this hazy photograph is the only evidence which is now left with us. What Aga Khan Memorial Trust has done is that they tore to shreds all the principles which had been laid down by people like Sir John Marshall. Remember that to study the this field of historical / medieval archaeology, we have to be well versed with the scripts in India, various type of scripts. Brahmi also kept on changing from Mauryas to Shungas, from Shungas to Kushana to the Gupta period. Each period had a different type of script. The basic name of the script remained the same, Brahmi, but letters kept on getting reformed, distinct fashion in which they were written, so much so that anybody indulging in these monuments, in these places which are of historical importance, they should be well versed in not only Brahmi but also Kharoshti, which is formed in the Gandhara, that is in the Pakistan and Punjab region. And then coming to the medieval period, as far as the Arabic and Persian script are concerned, there are a large number of scripts which were used on the monuments, starting from Khat Kufi down to Naskh and Suls, Nastalikh and Tughra were some of the, this is an example of the Kufic script, the Naskh, again a variety of Naskh, and these are some of the things which any person dealing with medieval archaeology has to grapple with. We also should remember that sometimes information about the common people's houses is also got from a large number of Hebanamas and Bainamas, the sale deeds and the gift deeds. I am just giving one example each. That, for example, this is the document of sale deed by Santidas Sahu, one of the very important merchants of Shah Jahan's reign, who used to, in fact, finance the Mughal Empire. He was one of the most well-known, richest jeweler of Gujarat. And this is the sale deed of his houses. And if you can see these pages, you would find the Naksha, the plan with where the openings of the rooms were, where the courtyard was, where the tree was within the courtyard. All these details are found in these nakshas, which are part of the sale deeds and the documents. Apart from that, from the monuments themselves, the scripts which are given on them, as well as the documents. The third variety which we have to take into account as students of medieval archaeology are the material remains in the form of Mughal miniatures. Now, if you look here, this is the bazaar of Fatehpur Sikri, but here, if you pay attention, it is not very clear. But what is depicted here? It is the furnace where lime mortar is being boiled and prepared. Remember that during the medieval period, there were two additions, technological additions, which made the common building structures very popular. One was the use of small bricks made out of simple clay, and the other was that they would be joined together by a new type of mortar. And this mortar was basically of lime and gypsum. And both these things could be prepared on the site itself. So these paintings give you evidence that you need not go to some other place and import the building material, but the building material itself was prepared on the site itself. Another aspect which we come to know from these miniatures, not only the whole organization of building construction, but also, as I said, the hydraulic works. I had shown you earlier the Buland Darwaza and the waterworks near it. Now see these Mughal miniatures, both these miniatures from Akbarnama. The Persian wheels and the wells, series of wells here, just in front of the Hathi pole, the main hydraulics. And it is through these paintings that we were able to identify what was the area for the supply of water for the palaces. Secondly, These paintings helped us in locating the markets. For example, see here, the pan seller, the person making the pan, selling the pans. This is the Hathi Pole. Behind the Hathi Pole is the second gateway. All those who have visited Fatehpur Sikri must have seen the second gateway also. And just besides that, there is this Dukan, the shop. We were able to excavate. This shop has now disappeared. It survived in the form of a mound, and when the Aligarh team excavated, a similar, establishment of at the similar spot were found at the same spot. So, in fact, the use of the material which is non-written, non-literary, helped us in understanding the past. Some other depictions of the of the building construction, how the lime mortar was prepared, what type of ramps were constructed, what type of dresses, which give us information about the social standing of various type of people, the classes. That all is explained through these miniature paintings. Another source for us, which is non-written, but one who is dealing with the past should grapple with, are a number of plans, the maps, town plans which have been made. For example, the plan of Shah Jahanabad, which survives from the 18th century. The map of Agra, made sometime 1720 to 1750, now preserved in the Jaipur City Palace Museum. This plan also tells us that the portion of the wall which is depicted in yellow is the portion which is being built now. At the time when this plan was made around 1720 to 50. The portion of wall which is shown in red had already been completed. Look at the riverfront. Abakosh, with the help of this map, was able to interpret the city of Agra as a riverfront city, where the face of the city was towards the river. A similar case as we find in modern day London or Paris or certain other places. Lastly, and here I would be stopping, we have the evidence on the monuments themselves. Each original piece of stone in these monuments contain the name of the master craftsman, the Memar, as well as the signature of that person. Now, for example, Hamu, Khargu. These are the names of the master craftsmen. Say at Fatehpur Sikri, the name Hamu is repeated around 3,000 to 4,000 times on individual pieces of stone slabs, on the floor, on the ceilings, on the pillars, on the brackets. Had it been only one or two times, we would have thought that some tourist had put it up. But the same name in the same style has been traced on a number of pillars. Remember one other thing, that most of these names, they are names which are not of Muslims. They are non-Muslims. Secondly, they are all written in Nagari script, not in Persian script. Was the master craftsman himself noting down his name on each of the stone piece which he was fixing? Probably not. Look at this central. It's just the mirror image of Hamu. Just as if the name had been traced on some tracing material, tracing paper or something. The person who was carving it was illiterate. He placed the tracing material in a reverse form and traced the name, cut the name with this chisel as a mirror image. Possibly the person who was tracing down these names, the name did not belong to him. He was illiterate. His only job was to write down the signature name identifying the work of a particular artist. Number two, along with these names, we also have a large number of marks, symbols, fish, zodiac signs. This here, these are all, for example, at Fatehpur Sikri, at Taj, at Etbatul Dawla, you name a building, Qutub Minar. These are just a few names and a few symbols which are there. Symbols which are zodiacal, symbols which are in the form of weapons, symbols which are in the form of fish. Names all are non-Muslim and all written in Arabic. What were these? I draw my conclusion that possibly they are the marks of the professionals, master craftsmen. Why? On the basis of a large number of legal documents which survived from 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. For example, we have flowers which have been put along with the names of individual Jawharis, dwellers in the documents who are signing as witness. And a flower of each Jawhari is different from the flower of the other Jawhari. For example, scissor, you can see on one of these slides, the scissor is drawn. Khema dog, the person signing the name along with them was a tent maker, a profession which uses scissors. All the swastikas on the lower side, they are put up along with and in place of names of the Banya merchants of Cambay. So all the Banyas are signing with one form of, swastika or the other. In other words, the symbol is related with the profession of the person who is putting up the, mark. If he is an indigo worker, he is putting up the mark which is in the form of a hook. If he is a jeweler, these are the flowers. If he is once again a dyer who dyes the clothes, he has the instruments of dyeing which are placed along with his name. So the profession describes the type of symbol which the person is taking up as his own to put up his signature. There is an evidence given in the account of Manucci. Manucci was one of the Italian travelers who came to India as a castaway in one of the ships, merchant ships. He was an illiterate fellow. He came to India. He was a European. So as per the habit of the Indians even today, if I am saying something, but I have got a dark skin, and somebody who is coming from Europe, he might be anybody, but if he is a Gora, a European, you would always very seriously hear him out as against what an Indian would be saying. Bahar ka aadmi keh raha hai. Firangi. This is still, ingrained in our society. Someone from having a degree from Cambridge but having very basic knowledge would still be preferred over a real master, but who has a degree only from an Indian university. A person may be thoroughly well read, but he doesn't know English. He knows only Hindi or Tamil. He would be considered to be a lesser scholar than a person who knows nothing but can speak very good English. This is in the psyche of the Indians. So Manuchi, when he came to India, he was a total illiterate vagabond, knew nothing, but Indians, not only the local Indians, but also even the nobility, thought that being a European, he must be a physician. Everyone started treating him to be a physician. He opened a physician's matab shop in Lahore market. He had a very successful business. Now he has left behind an account of the reign of Shah Jahan. Sir Jadunath Sarkar says that his account is based on gossips. He had no access to the court as such. So whatever he says is mere hearsay. But if you actually read Manuchi, you will find that there are gems which are hidden within his account. For example, he narrates that once one of the washermen at Lahore was washing his clothes in the river when suddenly he found a pot, a terracotta pot, floating. He went and took the pot. When he took the pot, he realized that there was a dead body inside it. The Kotwal of the city was called. Manuchi writes that the Kotwal looked at the pot. He looked at the potter's mark, the symbol which the potter had put on that particular pot. Through that symbol, the actual potter who had sold that pot was the Kotwal went to that person, inquired, who are your clients, whom do you sell the material? And in short, Manuchi says that the murderer was caught because of this potter's mark. So, ladies and gentlemen, these marks which are there in the buildings, which are there in the documents, which are there in the sale deeds, are all marks which give us an entire information regarding the society of the past. It tells us about fills up the gaps which written records actually fail to mention in tomes which were written. Akbarnama is supposed to be one of the very detailed accounts. There are so many sources for Aurangzeb's reign that it is almost impossible for any of all of them. But in spite of this surfeit of material, there is much which are missed by those sources, and those informations are only provided through the material remains, and that is why there is a strong need today for further development of this field of medieval archaeology, a science where both the material remains as well as written records are taken into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nadeem Rezavi, sir, for, I must say, such a wonderful and exciting presentation. Now I would invite questions. Those who want to ask questions can raise their hands.
I think someone has asked a question regarding the remains at Mandu and Asirgarh. Someone has written down the question.
Okay.
I saw it just now. Sir, how would you look at
Yes.
the archaeology of Mandu and Asirgarh? The question has been asked by Dr. Pooja. Dr. Pooja, I am an expert on Mughals and Fatehpur Sikri. And that is why when I started giving you examples, I did not base my slides on the internet. I took them out from my own work, right? But that doesn't mean that whatever I am saying is true only for the Mughals. As I pointed out, that the basic work was started in Champaner, in the University of Baroda. It was only later on that the medievalists or Mughalists at Aligarh took up that work. As far as Mandu and other places like Asirgarh are concerned, there is excellent work which survives on that, and each and every place for which we have written records as well as monumental and material remains. Whatever I told you today can be applied to them and is being applied to them. There is one name which I missed out when I was telling you of those who have written on medieval archaeology, and that name was of Professor Mate. Professor Mate was one of those who had initially was a person who denied the concept that there was anything known as medieval archaeology. He was actually a person who derided this term. There was another person known as Jamal Muhammad Siddiqui of Aligarh, who ultimately ended up writing a book on the physical remains of the Aligarh district. He also, in one of the articles, was laughing at what is medieval archaeology. But ultimately, in the 1990s, M.S. Mate wrote one of his presidential addresses addressed to the Indian History Congress. I am forgetting which session it was, where he wrote the whole presidential address on nothing else but medieval archaeology and its importance. And there he did not give any examples from the Mughal history, but he took up the examples from the Karnataka. He took up examples from Central India. He took up examples from South India. In short, to answer your question, that each and every place or where there is some information available, both materially and literally, we should strive to work there. And I think each and every place is quite important.
All right. Any more questions? Yes, Khalid, go ahead.
First of all, congratulations, sir, for this very interesting and informative lecture. I have a question which is rather of a sort of an assumption. What if a situation arises where we have a number of literary sources, including paint?
Sorry, where we have?
What if a situation arises where we have a number of literary sources, including paintings, which tells us about a very similar sort of history? And to the contrary, when we look at the archaeological sources, that take us to a different direction. So in if such case arises, what one would stick to? And have you ever come across any such problem when you deal with
unfortunately, my laptop is communicating my voice very clearly to you. But the other way around, I mean, your voice is not very, very clear when it is reaching me. However, what I understood, whatever I could understood with my old ears, is that you are asking that if there is